Today, we preview one of the best rotations of Major League Baseball. And the best part, it belongs to our Seattle Mariners. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. This is Trident and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On the show today, we begin our position preview series with a look at the Mariners starting rotation, because guess what? We're about 9 days away from opening day, so we're getting into all of this good stuff. We're going to be looking at George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Marco Gonzalez, that number 5 spot in the rotation as a whole, of course. But let's start here, Colby. Robbie Ray, Luis Castillo. The Mariners have added these guys over the last 15-ish months. Ray an offseason ago, Castillo at this past year's trade deadline, and Castillo is coming off of an incredible season overall, an incredible second half after making his way to Seattle. Obviously, had the big performance in Game 1 of the AL Wildcard Series against the Toronto Blue Jays. Another really nice start against the Astros in the ALDS as well. Overall on the season for Castillo, he struck out 10 guys exactly per 9, sported a 2.69 walks per 9, 2.99 ERA, 3.07 FIP, 3.23 xFIP, was worth 3.7 F4 and 150 innings pitched. What are your expectations for Castillo going into his first full season as the Mariners ace?
Yeah, I think it's important for Mariners fans not to take, playoff Luis Castillo and just assume that that's who this guy is going to be. It just seems unfair because he was so good in the postseason. And he's really good for, essentially the entire stretch run, minus like 3 starts, all against the A's of all teams. But yeah, I think, you should have high expectations, but I don't think it's fair to put, the playoff Luis Castillo expectations on Luis Castillo for an entire season. There's going to be some ups and downs. Obviously, there's going to be ups and downs with every single pitcher, even the elite guys like Verlander and Scherzer, and Castillo's not that. He's not that type of guy, or at least he hasn't been yet. Maybe he gets there for a year or two, but he hasn't yet. He's just a tier below those guys, but he's still a very good starter. I think you should expect, 25 to 30 starts. He's going to give you 150 to 180 innings, probably going to strike out more than a batter per 9. He'll keep the walks manageable. And I think for the most part, he's going to give you a shot against anybody you face. He can go toe-to-toe with Garrett Cole. We saw him do it. He can go toe-to-toe with Verlander or Scherzer or DeGrom, assuming DeGrom's ever healthy. He can go toe-to-toe with these guys. So while he's not quite on their level, he is just a tier below, and on any given day, he can match what they can do and then some. So the Mariners have themselves a legitimate, high-end number 2, maybe even a 1. I would, stop short of calling him an ace, but he is the Mariners ace, and he is absolutely going to get the opening day start. There's been some concerns about his velocity in spring training. It's been, 92, 93, a little 94 it mixed in. And at the end of last year, we know he was 97, 98, 99, even 100 a couple times. I don't think Luis Castillo needs that to be incredibly effective. The fastball is still a really good pitch. The angle on it is extreme. The movement on it is extreme. He has pretty good command of it. We know what the slider can be. And I think we might see him throw the changeup a little bit more. He kind of ditched it when he came to Seattle. There's some theories on that, but that was a really good pitch. It was, I don't want to say it was Felix Hernandez level, but it was pretty close. It's the closest thing to Felix's changeup that I've seen since, prime Felix. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that a little bit more, especially early while he's kind of building up and getting the velocity back. So I think eventually you want to see Castillo 95, 96, 97. But I don't think he has to be early to get there. I think it's just about, kind of building up and getting him on a roll and then unleashing him in May, June, July, et cetera. So he might have a couple rough starts, who knows? But I think overall you feel about as good with Luis Castillo on the mound as you could anybody else, aside from, the 3 or 4 true aces that actually exist in Major League Baseball right now.
Yeah, the really interesting thing for me is that changeup that you mentioned here for Castillo, because historically it's been his best pitch. It's been a pitch that a lot of people have referred to as a true 80 grade offering. And he didn't use it a lot since coming over to Seattle. Now, we had Alex Fass of Pitcherless on the show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about how he doesn't really think that Castillo needs it because of the ballpark and just the way that Castillo has used his other offerings since coming to the Mariners. But I mean, it's a legit weapon still. I don't know what it looks like now, especially after kind of taking a break away from him. It's not like he didn't throw it at all since coming over to the Mariners, but he definitely did throw it with less frequency. So what does that look like now? That's going to be kind of the interesting thing to see. But yeah, I'm really to say the word interested again, but I'm really interested to see if he does use it more here over the course of 2023, especially in the early going, like you mentioned, if the velocity isn't necessarily there, if it's going to take him a while to get back into the upper 90s. Robbie Ray is someone that we've been asked about all offseason, Colby. How do you fix Robbie Ray? How does Robbie Ray fix himself? This offseason, he's worked on kind of a new, meal plan, new diet. He's worked on a new pitch, a splitter, just like Logan Gilbert, just like a lot of guys around Major League Baseball, a lot of guys in the Mariners organization this offseason. He's clearly in a different mindset. And I think it's one that was necessary after a rough postseason that surely had to take at least a little bit of a mental toll on him for sure, especially after a really disappointing start in his old ballpark in Toronto, and then the Yordan Alvarez home run. Not to relive that. Obviously, was came in game 3 of the ALDS in relief late in that game. Had a good inning. Hopefully that gave him a little boost of confidence before his season came to an end. But I think we're going to see a revitalized Robbie Ray this year. And I think his numbers overall for the regular season, as far as that goes, were a bit overblown. I talked to Alex Fass about this as well, just to mention that interview again. You guys should go and listen to that as well. We dive into the Mariners rotation a lot in that interview. But Ray, made all of his starts. He was very healthy, just like the rest of the Mariners rotation. He threw 189 innings. He struck out 10 guys per 9, walked under 3 guys per 9, 295 walks per 9, 3.71 ERA, 4.17 FIP, 3.58 xFIP. Only a 1.8 F4. That's not great. It certainly was depending on where your expectations were with Ray, and last season heading into last year, we said this is probably not going to be a Cy Young contender, and Robbie Ray after he won his Cy Young, but it still was a little bit of a disappointing season in terms of as far as defending Cy Young campaigns go. But what do you think about Ray heading into 2023? Where's your mind at with him?
Sure. Because this is the 4th time we've recorded this, Ty knows the bomb I'm about to drop, but act surprised. Right. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
So we're doing bold predictions in about a week. I think we'll mix in some bold. Maybe we'll mix in bold predictions later this week. But one of my bold predictions is likely going to be that Robbie Ray will have a better season this year than he did in his Cy Young campaign. I am all in on Robbie Ray this year. And, one of the things that, Ty talked about, again, obviously the diet plan, and he does look, noticeably sveltier.
But when you wear
sure, it's
two sizes
hard.
too small pants and
right,
two sizes
right.
too small jersey,
right. So maybe he didn't, but whatever. Robbie Ray clearly made an effort to be in better shape, to eat better and do all that stuff. And one of the things that may or may not be a result of all the hard work he put in, he's coming to spring training and he's throwing hard. We've seen a lot of 94, 95, even some 96s. The slider's been sharp. He's been striking out a lot of guys in spring training. And there's a couple things we know about Robbie Ray, the pitcher. One, the guy posts. He goes out there every 5 days. He gives you innings. And number 2, he strikes guys out. And he's done both of those. He did both of those things last year, even in a down year for the Mariners. And a large part of that is because he just really didn't have the fastball value that he needed to. He was 91, 92, 93 most of the year. Really very rarely touched 95. but the slider was really good for most of the time. But when it did flatten out, and as it's prone to do, he didn't have the fastball to fall back on. So he didn't have that second pitch to kind of, survive. And to his credit, we saw Robbie really struggle early last year. He found a way around it to kind of help. He started using the two seamer a little bit, and then he really, once he found the slider, it was a lethal pitch for him, and that's what allowed him to be really a very good pitcher for about 4 or 5 months out of the season. It's just, unfortunately, the beginning was a little bit rough, the end was pretty rough, and that's kind of everything that got sandwiched in between kind of gets forgotten. But Robbie Ray, for a good 4-month period, was a legit number 2 starter. I mean, just every bit of it. So, I think we'll see what the new splitter can do for him. But at the end of the day, Robbie Ray is a 2-pitch guy. He has to have the slider and he has to have the fastball. That's his bread and butter. And it's what allowed him to be the most effective strikeout artist in MLB history per Ks per nine by a starter up until last year. It's the fastball slider combo. He's got to back foot that slider against righties. He's got to throw it away against lefties, and he has to have a pitch at the top of the zone that he can get swings and misses with. And to me, that's the fastball. And if he can add the splitter against right-handers, it's just another weapon that could legitimately turn Ray, into a Cy Young contender for the first time in his career. Because he probably shouldn't have won the Cy Young the year he actually did. I mean, I'm happy for him. I'm glad for him. But
you look at the numbers from 2021, it's not a typical Cy Young profile.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, I think Robbie Ray's on pace for another 4-win season. I'm very optimistic on him.
It really all comes down to the fastball and slider, like you said. And it's such a good thing. It's such a promising thing that the velocity is where it's at right now in spring as compared to last spring and the start of the season, because he's not going to find much success if he's 91, 92, especially if he's not getting consistent value out of the slider. And that's really the key to all of this, is getting consistent value out of the slider. Can he put that thing on the back foot of righties? And I think, I would go as far as to say that you'd be hard pressed to find many pitchers out there who desperately need a splitter or something that breaks away from righties as much as Robbie Ray does, because everything goes towards righties. That's it. Or it's down the pipe. So getting something in there in his repertoire that can break away from righties is going to be a game changer for him, especially when going against right-handed dominant lineups like the Blue Jays and the Astros. And obviously the Blue Jays have kind of gotten a little bit more lefty over this offseason, but still
the Angels
too. They're, I mean, in general, right, you're going to run into more right-handed hitters than lefties. Sure. So that's going to be the case for most lineups, but still it's such a huge need for Robbie. So if this is an actual viable offering that he has, it's a game changer, like I said. And so and that's why I'm very high on Ray really turning this thing around and seeing just an absolute revitalized version of Robbie Ray this year. I think, and he's been a guy that hasn't been afraid to reinvent himself, especially on the fly, like we saw last year when he re-implemented the two-seamer. So I have no concerns about Robbie just kind of staying complacent, right? Sitting on his hands if things get off to a slow start this year, or maybe he hits a bump in the road again or whatever. But I'm pretty high on his year as a whole here. And we're going to be getting into that more when we do our predictions and whatnot. More on the Mariners starting pitchers in just a moment, but real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get into some of the younger guys now. This is going to be, he came up in May of 2021, so I'm going to consider this Logan Gilbert's third full season at the major league level. last 2 years, the story, I mean, everyone knows it. The story with him has been, we know the fastball is great. The extension is elite, but the secondaries have been inconsistent at best. He's working on a splitter, but also he has a changeup. So that's not as big of a difference as maybe, or it doesn't make as big of a difference for maybe Gilbert as it would for someone like Robbie Ray. We'll get into the tunneling and all that stuff, I'm sure, in a little bit here, but and how that might help Gilbert. But the key for Gilbert overall is getting the secondaries consistent, finding something that he can lean on outside of the fastball and not just live off the fastball, because he has been able to live off the fastball at times. He's been able to get away with it in a lot of games. But I do have concerns about how long that is truly sustainable. Let's get into the overall numbers here for Gilbert on the year. Of course, he was the AL Pitcher of the Month in April, got off to an amazing start, but then kind of regressed a bit. Had some struggles finding the strike zone. Had some struggles, obviously, with getting any sort of efficiency out of his secondaries. 8.43 Ks per nine. He just hasn't really been a high strikeout guy since making the major leagues. He was a high strikeout guy in the minors, but that just hasn't really followed him to the major leagues. So 8.43 Ks per nine, 2.38 walks per nine, 3.20 ERA, 3.46 FIP, 3.78 xFIP, 3.2 F4, and 185.2 innings pitched. Made all of his starts just like pretty much everyone else in the Mariners rotation, and that's kind of another element that maybe we'll get into if we have time, is the health of all of this. But yeah, what do you think Gilbert needs to do here in 2023 to take that next step? Is the key to all this just the splitter? Because for me, in order for the Mariners to get where they need to go, Gilbert's got to be more than what he's been over the last couple of years.
Which feels a little weird from a guy coming off of a 3.4 FIP season.
Right.
So yeah, for Gilbert, it's not necessarily just about the splitter. It's about any of the secondaries. Can he have a consistent secondary pitch for a majority of the year? Because so far, the answer has been no. We've seen it in flashes. We saw what happened when he went up against the Yankees and he had just fastball slider. He dominated that lineup. I think he's done it against the Red Sox as well. We've seen what happens when he has the changeup. He can really go to town on lefties when he can spot that thing. It's just those two pitches have been so inconsistent with the control. I mean, forget command, putting it where you want to. Can you put it near the strike zone? Because there are times where the changeup will end up in the other batter's box 4 or 5 times in a row. So it's really about that secondary pitch, and maybe it is the splitter, which is a nice addition. Logan Gilbert has massive hands. That makes it pretty easy to throw the splitter. It also tunnels really well with the fastball. So when Pitching Ninja does those videos where he simultaneously throws 2 pitches, you'll see the fastball and the splitter will come out of the exact same arm slot with the exact same arm speed. The fastball will rise or ride, and the splitter will tumble as he gets to home plate, and it'll look like the same pitch for essentially the first half of the flight to home plate, and then it will change course. So the splitter is that weapon if he can throw it consistently near the strike zone. It really is a great pitch for Logan Gilbert particularly, but we can't assume he's going to have that right away. We can't assume that he's going to use that in games and it's going to change his entire career around, which, I mean, to be fair, his career is already in a pretty good spot. So it's not like, we're talking about resurrecting his career. We're just talking about taking that next step. So maybe it is the splitter. To me, if I had to bet on a pitch, it would be the slider. I think that's kind of the pitch that's more likely. He's thrown it more. He's very familiar with it. And we know Gilbert is a lab guy. He goes in, he studies the analytics. He looks at the data. He looks at scouting reports. He understands how to pitch. He's a worker. He's an extremely intelligent pitcher who understands his strengths, his weaknesses, and what he needs to work on. So I think he'll get there. I think he could get there. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Gilbert took another step forward and he ended up being a number 2. But it is going to come down to that off-speed pitch. He has to have one. And honestly, I don't really care which one it is. I think which one profiles best with Gilbert, it's probably the splitter. But because this is the first year throwing it, I don't want to trust it at all. So I think it really comes down to the slider, or maybe even the curveball, which he's thrown a little bit, and it does flash. But for the most part, it's more of a get me over steal a strike type of pitch. So I think it's going to be fastball slider for Gilbert. If the splitter comes along, then it could be, look out. It could be all-star Logan Gilbert time.
Foolish Baseball, great baseball YouTuber,
Mhm.
does these video series every year before the season where he goes over 5 players he likes, 5 players he dislikes. And one of the players that he dislikes for this year is Gilbert for all the reasons that we just mentioned. And I get it, right? Because you can only live off of the fastball so much. And he's done a great job of doing that and getting through that. And the numbers have been great. Like like you mentioned, he's coming off of a 3.4, FIP season. He was a 3.2 F4 guy last year. He was one of the most valuable pitchers in all of baseball, not just the American League last year. So he's been able to get by with this. I do have some concerns about how sustainable that is, especially when you get into the really, really good lineups of baseball. And again, if he's going to be a big part of your rotation, you're going to need him to take that next step. You're going to need to be able to trust him going into Houston, which he had a really good start against Houston in the ALDS. He's pitched well in big games. He pitched incredibly well in the clinch game. Obviously, that's against the A's, but still, and I guess my concerns here is that we're not going to see any growth from Gilbert this year in terms of the secondaries. And I mean, that's really what that's tied to, is the development of more consistency with the secondaries. But I am concerned that we might not see enough growth out of Gilbert to the point where we get to September, October, and it's like, do I trust Logan Gilbert to not blow up in the postseason, to not blow up against the Astros? So far, he hasn't. But again, I would prefer that not to be a question that we have to ask once we get there. I would like for him to take that next step, have something else that he can rely on aside from the fastball. He needs it.
Ty hates Logan Gilbert confirmed.
There we go. He's
said
my
it
Dylan
right
Moore.
there.
He's my Dylan Moore, obviously.
I mean, you guys heard it, right? He just said that Logan Gilbert is the number 5, and that's all he'll ever be. Like that.
Right.
That feels extreme to me.
The one thing that I will say about Logan, though, do not grow that disgusting goatee again. Don't do it. Thank God you shaved it. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you for shaving that.
Yes, Sir Logan of Lionheart or whatever he was going for, Sheriff of Nottingham. Whatever party was auditioning for, he didn't get it. That's good.
That was Walter. That's his Walter White goatee. It was his Heisenberg.
No,
not a great look. Not a great look. Don't bring it back.
Some guys can pull it off. You cannot.
No. Full beard. If you're gonna do facial hair, full beard.
Yep.
Full beard. There was Zach Left, great follow on Twitter. He actually photoshopped a beard on Gilbert, I think, last off season. It looked good. It looked good.
Oh, okay.
So
even now the question is, can he grow a beard?
Yeah, I mean, he can grow the goatee. I assume that he can grow it on the rest of his face.
We've seen Kelnick try to grow a mustache, so
yeah.
I feel like Logan could at least try.
Yeah, that was a thing. We'll get to another guy that has a very interesting mustache here in a bit, but. Our starting pitching preview for the 2023 Mariners continues in just a moment, but first, a reminder this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here, and we know you have a favorite bar or puff, so now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites, and when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to their door. You gotta try Built. Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing you won't think they're good for you. And what makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they are all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Now back to our show. But let's move on to George Kirby, someone that you and I have sung the praises of all off season, but especially over the last 6 or so weeks. I mean, we're incredibly high on George Kirby, and how could we not be? He's been at the top or near the top of pretty much every pitching metric there is over his first 130 innings of his major league career. 9.21 Ks per nine this past season, 152 walks per nine, just elite command. Some of the best command you'll ever see out of a starting pitcher, especially with someone that throws as hard as he does and has as diverse of a repertoire as he does. 3.39 ERA, 2.99 FIP, 3.3 xFIP, 3.33 xFIP, and a 3 flat F4 for Kirby in his first full season at the major league level. Dude's a monster. And obviously, you know, the thing that still lives rent free in my head when I think about George Kirby is that start against the Astros and the Mariners' first home playoff game in over 20 years. After closing the big comeback win in his first relief appearance in his major league career in Toronto. Dude just had one of the most impressive. It was short-lived, you know, it wasn't long, but he had one of the most impressive playoff performances that you could possibly imagine out of a guy his age, out of a guy that is a rookie. And that's one of the main reasons that I think I messaged you that night, or maybe the day after or something, that I was like, you know, it's early, but I have a feeling that I might end up picking George Kirby as my Cy Young winner when we do our predictions near the start of the season. And spoiler alert for when we do predictions next week, that's probably going to be the case. So Colby, why are we so excited about Kirby? Why should fans be just over the moon about what Kirby could be in 2023?
It's kind of counterintuitive when we talk about why you should be excited. When I'm going to mention that one of the reasons you should be excited is because Kirby has such a high floor. Right? We typically think of floor as like, oh, that's just what he's going to be, blah blah blah. But the ceiling gets people really excited, and it should, because there is plenty of ceiling left with Kirby. But the floor with Kirby is so high that it's hard to imagine him being anything less than a number 3. Because of the command, because of the stuff, because of the pitchability, because of the brain and the, George Kirby's the whole package. He knows how to pitch. He knows how to use his stuff. He's constantly, labbing pitches. He's constantly learning. He's constantly tweaking. He's a really good pitcher mind, but he also has, 65, 70 grade command. The stuff is all at least above average. And if he can get the off-speed stuff to tick up even a half grade each, we're talking about a legitimate ace in Major League Baseball, because this is a guy who misses bats. He doesn't walk guys. You have to get hits to beat him. And his stuff is so good that you're going to have trouble bunching together hits. So, and because he can stay out of the middle of the plate, you're going to have a hard time hitting home runs off of George Kirby. So Kirby is a guy, he's a really good athlete. Like the worst I could possibly imagine George Kirby being, assuming health, is a mid-3 ERA guy who strikes out 8.5, 9 per 9. I mean, that's like the worst I can think, because we know he's not going to walk anybody. He's not going to let the other team just, get free runs off of him. They have to earn it. And Kirby's stuff is so good, and the command is so good, that it's really hard to bunch stuff up against him. So to me, the high floor is what makes Kirby so exciting, because we know what he is and we know how close he is to the ceiling, which is, in my opinion, for Kirby, it legitimately could be an ace.
That's what makes him so special, right? Because usually guys with elite command, they're the ones that, they're 90, 91, they're cherry picking the zone. Like that's how they have to
nibble.
That's how they have to find efficiency. We don't see, it's not every day that we see someone that throws as hard as Kirby does, that again has as diverse of a repertoire as he does, with that elite command. It's just, he's different. I hate to say it. I hate to say this term, but he's different. He's built different.
It's Verlander-esque. So, because you look at Verlander's best years, he's walking less than 2 guys per 9, and it's 98 to 100, and it's just insane, man.
Yeah, like if you can throw upper 90s at will wherever you want it, whenever you want it, like
you can even get some run on it, some movement.
Yeah. And you also have like secondaries that you can actually consistently rely upon as well. It's game over. This, again, the ceiling for George Kirby, I thought, before we saw him at the major league level, number 2 if everything goes well. I think now we're talking about George Kirby could be one of the best pitchers in the game. at his best.
Wouldn't be shocked.
It's just it's a special profile. It really is. I'm really excited to see him this year. Now we have to move on to something that's not as exciting. The biggest wild card in the Mariners rotation, that number 5 spot. Currently, it is held by Marco Gonzalez. We don't expect that to change. To pull back the curtain a little bit here, we're recording this on Thursday the 16th, so hopefully no injuries or anything have occurred. Let's just knock on wood there with all of that. But for now, Marco's slotted to be the number 5. Chris Flexen to the bullpen for now. Maybe he's gotten traded between the time we're recording this and this the show airing. But Marco obviously coming off of a down year, rough year for Marco, rough last couple of years for Marco really. 507 Ks per 9, 246 walks per 9, 413 ERA, 505 FIP. He was worth just 0.1 F4 this past season in 183 innings pitched. Made all of his starts, just like everyone else in the Mariners rotation. It's hard to, because I feel bad. Let's start here. I feel bad talking poorly about Marco because he's done a lot of great things for this organization. He's been a leader in the clubhouse, all that. But it's hard not to feel like he's washed at this point. And the thing that we do have to acknowledge here is that, look, and even Jerry DePoto said this when he was on our show, that you're going to get some blow up starts out of Marco. You're going to get the starts like we saw against the Angels in his first start of spring training. And then you're going to get like 18 to 22 quality starts over the course of the season. He can be really effective. It's just there's no sort of consistency. There's no sort of reliability here with Marco. There's none of that. And we'll get into what else is coming down the pipeline. What, who else could factor into this number 5 spot eventually over the course of the season. But it's hard not to feel like Marco, even though he's going to start the year in the rotation, is ultimately on his way out.
Yeah. Bryce Miller will be in this rotation by Memorial Day. So,
yeah.
I think, the writing's on the wall for Marco. There's always a possibility he turns back the clock and he's 2020 Marco. And then all of a sudden we can have a really fun conversation, because then we're talking about, we have a 1 through 5 we feel really good about, because in 2020 Marco, he was a legit number 3 starter. In any rotation. He was that good. And if that's the case, which I don't think it will be, but hypothetically, if that were the case, now we're talking about, let's move Bryce Miller to the bullpen for a couple months at the end. Let's move Prelander Barreau to the bullpen for a couple months at the end. And now all of a sudden we're talking about the Mariners going from Marco for 5, and then they're going to Miller, Brash, Munoz, Barreau, and like game over, right? So I don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately. If Flexen is traded, Marco could transition to the bullpen. I don't think they would just DFA Marco. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I don't think it's likely. I think they still value him. He's another guy. He is, he's a consummate professional. He really works hard. He goes over the scouting reports. He's constantly self-scouting. He did add a slider this winter, and that is a pitch that could actually help him miss a few more bats, which is something Marco desperately needs to do. So I don't want to say it's impossible for Marco to survive the year, because Marco's, proven us wrong so many times in the past, but the last 2 years have not been good. Bryce Miller is essentially major league ready. And right now it's just kind of about managing his innings so that he doesn't need to miss 2 weeks in September or whatever. Or you don't have to move him to the bullpen because he's spent his bullets. Right. So once Miller's ready to go, they feel like they can manage his innings without hurting the team throughout the regular season. He's going to be in this rotation. And I think that's going to probably be by the end of May. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm rooting for Marco, but we have to see a lot more than we have the last 2 years. And I mean, a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Marco is expecting a child sometime in April, so he might have to miss a start. That's probably going to be Chris Flexen who makes that start, bullpen day, whatever. But I would assume that even if Flexen is around, if Flexen doesn't get traded here within the next couple weeks, or even after the regular season starts, that the next man up is Bryce Miller. Whether things go well with Marco really or not, because Miller just seems to be that good to essentially, even if Marco is performing fine, let's say, not great, but fine, just kind of down the middle here.
Low 4 ERA and FIP.
Yeah, I
Like
think
that type.
I think Miller is still good enough to push Marco out of the rotation, even at that point.
Right.
There's been a lot of hype around Bryce Miller this offseason.
Most of it coming from the Mariners too. So like this isn't just like Joe Doyle really likes him, so like we're hyping him up. Like no, the Mariners are very high on Bryce Miller.
Yep.
I mean, Jerry DiPoto essentially said that he's our best prospect on our show. Like when we expect him to be a huge impact for our 2023 ball club.
Right.
So the Mariners are really high on Miller, and they should be, at just like you should be. It's just unfortunate when it is almost certainly going to come at the expense of Marco, but you never know. Injuries do happen. It's not the worst thing in the world to have a guy like Marco in your bullpen or in the back end of your rotation and stuff like that. So I don't want to push off Marco, but he's going to start the year as the number 5. I would be shocked if he finished the year as the number 5. It's kind of a bummer, but sentimentality doesn't win the American League West.
Right.
So we'll see what happens, but
so circling back here to Miller again, a lot of hype around him, but it does feel unfair to set very high expectations on someone so young that hasn't even pitched above the AA level up to this point. It really only has, just not a ton of innings at AA either, right? Like it hasn't, he doesn't have a ton of experience. He was drafted just a couple of years ago, but big fastball. We've seen the 2 slider grips and all this stuff, and we've seen him in games, and he's been dominating in spring training. It's hard not to get excited, and especially when you compound that with the Mariners' pitching development, their track record after seeing Logan Gilbert and now George Kirby. It's hard not to feel like this guy can make a legitimate impact right away, like the way that Jerry DiPoto has been talking about. And so at that point, is it too far to say that if we actually do see the best that Bryce Miller can be at this point, that this could be, that he could take them from being a really good top 10 rotation to like top 3 rotation in baseball?
No.
Okay.
That's certainly something that Miller is equipped to do. Again, without wanting to put undue pressure on the guy, I would not be shocked at all if Miller came up and had a George Kirby like effect. I don't want to say he'll repeat Kirby's numbers, because I still think Kirby is a little bit better of a pitching prospect than Miller is. But I think he can have that effect where everybody kind of gets to slot down a little bit because you add this mid-rotation guy in the middle of the year, and he didn't cost you anything. You didn't have to go give up Noel V. Marte to get him, right? So I think he can, and I think if we get to the end of the year and it's Castillo, Ray, Kirby, Gilbert, Miller, and they're all healthy, that is the type of rotation that wins World Series. So
agreed.
We'll see. It's a long way to go. And we know that guys are probably going to miss some time here and there. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. But if they can get to a point where all 5 of those guys are pitching at the same time, in a rotation at the end of the year or for an extended period of time even, they're going to catch the Astros and they're going to win the West and they're going to host multiple playoff games at T-Mobile because that rotation is downright filthy.
Yeah. If Miller is what we think he can be, just an utterly disgusting rotation, truly just gross. Like it's so good. Like there's a possibility here. I'm not going to say that it's a very likely possibility, but there's a possibility here that Robbie Ray's your worst pitcher. Bryce Miller's as good as we think that he can be. Like,
it's a possibility. Yeah.
That's scary. That's scary to think about for any opposing lineup out there. It doesn't matter if you're the Astros, if you're the Phillies, it doesn't matter. Having to go up against that rotation in a 7-game series is going to be a nightmare.
Because there's a pretty good chance in a 7-game set you're going to move Logan Gilbert to the bullpen or Bryce Miller to the bullpen.
Or Bryce Miller to the bullpen. Yeah.
Or Robbie Ray, maybe. You're not going to get, the number 5 guy in a series like that. But
yeah,
it has the potential to be really scary. And honestly, bullpen might not be that far behind. And that is what we call a tease. Boom. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, bullpen preview. We're going to be doing the infielders and catchers in an episode. And we're going to be doing the outfielders, talking some Julio, talking some Teo, talking Jared Kelnick. Of course, you guys, I'm sure you guys want us to talk some Jared Kelnick. We're going to be doing that later on this week. Just to pull back the curtain a little bit, we're recording this on Thursday, March 16th again. Like I said, we're going to be recording a lot of these shows ahead of time because I'm going to be in Vegas next week. Maybe by the time that you're watching this, I'll be in Vegas. So we're going to be recording these all ahead of time, and hopefully they're all relevant by the time that they drop still. Just fingers crossed on that. Knowing our luck, though, something will probably happen. But that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, it's DaneGNZLZ, and my co-host Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day. And we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.